Welcome, everyone, to our regularly scheduled meeting of the can't say it right, Infrastructure Oversight Board. There we go. Welcome, everyone, and tonight we will have one period of public comment, and at the IOB, you still will have 3 minutes to speak and have the option to participate via in-person or telephone. So if you'd like to comment tonight, please call 818-238-3335. And we will commence the meeting at this point. And our first item of business is the flag salute. So I would ask everyone to rise. Great, thank you, everyone. Okay, and next on the agenda is roll call.
Maria Coronado,
Present.
Armin Avazian,
Present.
Linda Besson,
Present?
Jean Schomburger,
Here.
Colin Hoffmeister,
Here.
Shant Kodaberdian is absent today, and Shane Weber is also absent today.
Great, thank you. Do we have any announcements from staff?
I don't think so.
No? Okay, well, welcome
guess
back
not,
to.
yes.
I'm sorry?
No announcements.
Thank you. Welcome back to our representative from the City Attorney's Office, Kane. It's good to have you back at our meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
And the next agenda item is public comment. Do we have anyone from the public to speak?
We have no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you. And then we move on to the consent agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of the IOB meeting held on August 22nd, 2024. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Okay, any changes or comments, questions? Okay, can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Any second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you so much. And then roll call.
Maria Coronado,
Yes.
Armin Avazian,
Yes.
Linda Besson,
Yes.
Jean Schomburger,
Yes.
Colin Hoffmeister,
Yes.
and Shant Kodaberdian and Shane Weber abstaining.
Great, thank you. So the minutes are approved. And now we move to reports to board.
Shouldn't you be on there with the mic?
Ms. Penn, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we should go on the mic so people watching at home can
Yeah.
hear.
Remember to push button.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the board. My name is Karen Pan, Transit Manager with Burbank Bus, and I'm here with my colleague, Nick Barant, our Senior Analyst, and both of us work in Community Development Department, specifically in Transportation Division. We're here to present you the proposed parking management plan for our downtown Burbank. And why are we here today? Last year in October, council had directed us to look at a parking management plan for our downtown. And we specifically looked at our downtown area because that's our most impacted area where there's low parking availability. Pre-COVID, we were looking at MetroLink, and we've shifted towards downtown at the moment. So what's been going in downtown? We just completed the San Fernando reconfiguration of a one-way street along San Fernando Boulevard, and that was completed in March of this year. And in the past year, we've taken a look at neighboring cities, what they do for parking management plan, how we can implement some of those strategies. And for us, our goals are to help customers find reliable parking along those streets, as well as increase access to those businesses. And our third goal is to reduce emissions so cars aren't driving along trying to find parking along those major streets. And the way we manage parking today, we have several thousand parking spaces along downtown, whether they be on street, parking lots, or through our parking structure. We have two management tools the way we do it. It's basically by signage and with time limits. We do have parking permits. There's a daily use permit of $67, a daily use permit of $6, and a monthly permit for $67. And those are usually purchased by businesses or employees that work along that street. The downfall of the way we manage parking today is that even with signage and different types of curbs, we still have low availability of parking along those streets. There is limited regulations on how we manage those parking spaces. We don't have any pricing today, and we don't have any mechanism at the moment to generate that parking revenue to be reinvested back into our downtown infrastructure. And today, there is no technology that's being used to manage parking, and today there's many mechanisms and solutions on how that would look like. And today's presentation is really focused on what are the components to our plan. The way we've structured this is that we're looking at on-street parking, meaning the parking spaces along the major streets like San Fernando and Olive Avenue. And our proposal is to have price be its way of managing that parking availability, meaning that we would charge for that parking space based on the time that you spent there. And our target occupancy goal is 80%, meaning that every block we hope to have about 1 to 2 parking spaces available based through parking, through price. And so with that parking fee, we hope to reinvest it back into our infrastructure. And part of this plan talks about how we would implement this. And so these are the main components of our plan. There are management strategies on how we look at time restriction, paid parking. Part of this is also the infrastructure. So visually, as a customer or a visitor, what will you see that will be new along those streets? As well as how do we enforce this new parking management? And there's new technology with license plate recognition, and we'll go over that detail. And right here is a map of our proposed location that we want to focus on this plan. It's the major streets horizontally that you see on the screen is San Fernando Boulevard. And then part of this plan includes Magnolia, Palm, Orange Grove, and Angelino from 3rd Street to 1st Street. And what we anticipate is signage, which are the markings that you see on the image, as well as multi-space kiosk where you would be able to pay for parking. And I'll hand it over to Nick, who will go over the details of the regulations.
So as Karen mentioned, we're going to start our proposed fee at $2 per hour, and it will be based on occupancy level. And to dive a little bit deeper into that, what that means is that every month or every few months, we are going to take occupancy counts and then adjust the price based on what that occupancy is. If the occupancy is really high, that means that the price is too low and that we need to raise the price. If the occupancy is very low, that means we're charging too high of a price and we would bring the price down. This would happen, we're anticipating, on a quarterly basis. We will also be instituting paid parking hours from 8 a.m. to either 10 p.m. or midnight, and we are also open to considering other time frames. Furthermore, the time limit is, currently there's no uniformity. There are various time limits across that paid parking or our proposed parking meter district, and you can see anything from 90 minutes to 1 hour to 2 hours, and we are proposing to make it a uniform 2 hours across that area. And just to further underscore the need for parking regulate or to manage parking with price, what you see on the screen right now is on-street occupancy on Thursday and Saturday, and this was taken earlier this year. As you can see, San Fernando Boulevard and the streets around San Fernando Boulevard have extremely high parking occupancies, and they are often well above the 80% threshold that we are going to use to be our guidepost for whether or not to raise or lower parking prices. And the idea behind the 80% threshold is that 80%, if 80% of spaces are occupied, that typically means that there is always one to two spaces open per block face. We also did a parking study of surrounding cities or similar cities and found that $2 per hour is pretty typical, and that's why that's our going to be our starting price. We also plan on hiring a parking operator. They will be responsible for several different, they'll have several responsibilities. They'll be collecting physical money from the kiosks. They'll maintain the infrastructure, that'll be both kiosks and signs. They will manage parking enforcement. They will provide customer service to the public and aid in outreach and education. And we expect those last two to be extremely critical because Burbank at the moment has no paid parking, essentially. And going from no paid parking to paid parking is a pretty big lift. And we will need all the help that we can get, both from city staff, from our electeds, should they approve this, to other boards and commissions, to our parking operator to help change or help educate how parking is supposed to happen in downtown Burbank. We plan to have several different types of infrastructure. We can divide it into ways to pay and signs. The ways to pay are kiosks, which are, you can see an example of a kiosk on the left side. They will accept coins and credit card. And we also plan on having a mobile payment application where folks can pay should they not want to use, from the convenience of their phone, should they not want to use a kiosk. We also plan on installing regulatory signage and mobile pay signage. The regulatory signage is the second from right, and the mobile pay signage mock-up is on the right. We also plan on hiring parking enforcement, extra parking enforcement, beyond what our city currently contracts with. They will be using automatic license plate recognition, and it's a similar procedure to what the current citywide parking enforcement does. We will have a fiscal impact. There will be ongoing consultant services needed for parking management and parking enforcement. The cost and revenue will be budgeted in the Parking Authority Fund, and we expect the parking management revenues to more than offset the operation and enforcement costs. However, there will be a one-time general fund request for the launch for the first year. The infrastructure required is not insubstantial, but we don't expect any impact on Measure P funds. The next steps are to continue outreach. We will be going back to the PBID and as well as the Transportation Commission before heading to the City Council we're anticipating November. And then we will be implementing in early 2025. And that concludes our presentation, and we are happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Please go ahead, Colin.
Thank you for your presentation. I just had a question about the LPR. Is that an expensive technology? I guess we're all kind of familiar with those cars going by, reading our license plates, and do you get a return on that type of investment?
So the LPR is not what we are going to be investing in. That will be that's what the city's, or what our chosen parking enforcement operator will be using. From what I understand, our police department is very happy with LPR. It's, I think it's what is going to be the future of parking enforcement, not just here, but in other cities across the country. So we're paying for it, but we're not responsible for the investment or the capital outlay to procure that.
I see, so that'll be actually technology that like a vendor is going to use?
Exactly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, go ahead. Okay, yeah, I have a bunch too. We're the question due. So my first question is, you mentioned San Fernando and the reconfiguration. When that was done, it was stated that it was going to be evaluated and then a decision would be made whether it be temporary or permanent. Has that decision been made?
That decision has not yet been made. There is going to be a 6-month update at the City Council in October, if I'm not mistaken, October 29th. And then in March 2025, staff is going to return to council again with a formal recommendation on whether to keep or to revert it back or to make any other changes.
Okay. Now, would that decision in regard to San Fernando, how it's made by City Council, affect your plans at all in this, depending on what they decide?
Thank you for your question. We'll be working hand in hand to make sure that there's alignment between both projects, just because it has to deal with parking spaces. And so however council chooses to look forward to for that San Fernando, we would adjust what we would need to adjust. Luckily for parking management, to install the multi-space kiosk, because it's not per parking space as a traditional parking management meter, there's definitely more flexibility on what we can and cannot do. And luckily the multi-space parking kiosks are just a drill down. It doesn't require any underground work that's involved. And so it'll be really easy and flexible for us to adjust however council chooses to do so for the reconfiguration and or the parking management.
Great, thank you.
If I may, just to add on to that, I think the only thing that it might affect is we made some changes to our colored curbs with the reconfiguration. I think we would have to re-examine what those colored curbs are, and that might have a minor effect on what we're planning to do, but in a broad sense, I don't think it would have any require any changes.
Terrific, thank you. Long ago, Glendale had free parking on Brand, and then they switched it into metered parking. And they, I'm sure, went through a process with the public to try to ease the public into that. Have you found out how that was handled by Glendale and gotten any kind of pros and cons of ways to how to handle that kind of process?
That's a very good question. Throughout this project, we really did look into what neighboring cities were doing, and we were fortunate enough to talk to Glendale a couple of times just to understand how they did their rollout. And it's very different on how they did it, because when they rolled it out, they did it during COVID, and it was just a different time. And on top of that, they decided to go through kiosks first, as opposed to kiosk and mobile application. And they just rolled out mobile application as of this year. And so they've just taken a different approach on how they look at things and how they structure their pricing. And so it's good to learn from them. They did tell us some best practices on what we should consider, especially for implementation, and they really highlighted that education is a huge portion of this. And yeah, every city is different and similar at the same time, and that was how Glendale rolled out their parking management.
Terrific. So you talked about the hours and who enforces. One of my thoughts in looking at the map and listening to you is that are we going to end up with a whole bunch of people ended up parking at the mall to avoid the cost of parking?
You know, it's possible that happens. And if that's the case, then we would lower our price. And so what we want to be is responsive to, the goal behind this project is to manage parking. It's not to generate revenue for the city. It's to ensure that there are spaces available for patrons of businesses on San Fernando who want to park in front of those businesses. If that means that people decide to park at the mall and walk through the mall to have free parking, then I think that just means that there's going to be more availability for parking on San Fernando. I don't necessarily think that it's just going to completely evaporate. There's always demand for parking right in front of where you want to go.
There's the classic kind of bit that people talk about where you park at the Glendale Galleria and walk to the Americana. So I'm kind of wondering if that's a situation we may end up with. So just kind of thinking ahead on that.
Having done that several times myself, I don't think that's going. I think one of the reasons that happens is that parking at the Galleria or at the Americana is quite a bit more expensive than what we anticipate our on-street parking to be, and people tend to stay at the Americana quite a bit longer than what we want on-street parking to be. On-street parking is meant to turn over fairly quickly, but if you're going to the mall and you expect to spend several hours there, to go to a movie, to go shopping, to stay there for a long time, then I think you should park in an off-street structure, like one of the city's parking structures or at the mall.
Okay, so having mentioned that, for example, the lot on Palm, the underground, that would remain free and that wouldn't change.
Correct.
So people know that it's just certain areas that are going to be paid. It's not going to be all of downtown that's going to become paid.
Right, that's correct.
Right, okay. Looking at the map that you showed, where you showed the different hours that Thursday versus Saturday, and then you had the green area that was very empty, and then the red areas that were very full. Most of those green areas were south of the 5 freeway. So I just want to make sure that we're not putting people in a situation where we're telling them, well, you can park over here, but you're going to have to walk across the bridge in Magnolia to get to downtown. Because I personally would be scared to death walking over that bridge. And I know a lot of people wouldn't be really thrilled if we present that as a free parking alternative.
I think we have plenty of parking capacity in downtown Burbank where that won't have to happen. I don't anticipate that being something that people have to do. As we mentioned, there are 6,000 parking spaces in downtown Burbank, and that doesn't even count the 4,500 that are at the mall that are privately owned, or any of the other privately owned lots. We think that there is a good amount of capacity, parking capacity to serve Burbank's needs. What we want to do is just focus in on the San Fernando Boulevard and its surrounding streets to make sure that those parking spaces are available and used and turned over quickly.
And we appreciate that comment. A lot of the past year has been what if, and anything can happen. So we want to be mindful of situations that could happen. Maybe people, for some reason, feel like there's parking across the bridge, and we don't want that to happen, and you're right about that. And it's just one of those things that we'll pay attention to. If we need to add more signage about availability of parking in downtown, that is something that we would consider doing as
Okay.
well.
The only reason I thought of it was, again, the map that you showed that had the green areas highlighted. I didn't know if those spots were included in the numbers that you were discussing. So you're saying that they're not?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, great. And then in regard to the hourly cost, you had listed several cities, including West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, and then you had Pasadena. Pasadena was $1.25, and the others were $2 to $2.50. I would kind of feel like we're more in line with Pasadena rather than Beverly Hills, and even maybe even a little different in terms of the people who come to visit downtown Burbank and come to spend money in downtown Burbank. So, I mean, I understand you think, you see $2 as a median price, but honestly, you know, just as a resident, if you had a lower price to begin with, I think it would help people be more accommodating toward the change, rather than saying, well, if you know, if we need to, we can lower the price.
We appreciate that comment. When we were looking into Pasadena, we kind of wanted to understand how they handled their pricing structure. And Pasadena is just as different as well, where along the on-street parking, they have a lower rate, but when you park at the structure, it's definitely a higher rate than that $1.50. And then when you go to different parts of Old Town versus maybe the shops along South Lake Avenue, they structured their parking prices different as well. And so they've just taken a different perspective between parking structures where that is very high and their on-street is at $1.50 at a lower rate. And then ours is different where we have pricing for on-street, but we don't have any pricing for our structures.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is, you had mentioned that revenues would be reinvested in the Parking Authority program, but we also have several different vendors who are involved in this, doing parking enforcement, aiding the public, all of that. So in terms of these consultants or companies that we're hiring, how much do you anticipate that they would be taking out of the revenue that is generated? And so how much of that revenue would actually go back into the city?
I can answer that question. For this plan, there would be what Nick had mentioned, the contract for the parking operation, as well as enforcement, as well as the mobile payment application. I would say there's parts to it in terms of the convenience fee, the credit card transaction fees, and we've made a policy decision to include that as a city cost rather than the customer itself. And so we're looking at probably, if we were to guesstimate right now, it's not confirmed just because we're going through the contract management part of it, but it's looking at around 70%. The highest portion of it is most likely the parking enforcement, just because our goal is to have that availability of parking, and that's our priority. We wanted to make sure that we invest in parking enforcement representatives.
So I'm sorry, so the 70% is what's coming back to the city or what's going out to be paid?
What's going out to consultants.
So we would get 30% of the revenue?
Yep.
Okay, okay. Please go ahead. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you. So I have a few questions, but I'll just pick up with that revenue piece. So I was doing some very rough math based on your numbers, that if there's 2,290 on-street spaces, which is the scope of this, right?
Sort of. That's just the total number of parking spaces in downtown Burbank. We expect to manage about 150 of them.
That's all?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because it looks like you're managing the whole, like all of them.
It looks big. It's 150.
So this is literally only 150 spaces?
Yep.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, then that changes the numbers exponentially. So on the big map, then, you've got two pilot areas, alternative 1 and 2?
We initially had considered stopping at Olive Avenue, but we decided to extend it on San Fernando past to include the block between Olive and Angelino.
So that's the only difference between 1 and 2, is that one little stub?
Yep.
Okay, so this structure, this map, this is only 150 spaces?
Yep. It's just on-street spaces. If you were to include, I think, everything, most of what you saw in that second map that had like that color gradient, that would be closer to the 2,300 number that you saw previously.
Okay, so there's still going to be lots of on-street parking that
Yes.
is not, okay.
Yes.
just a suggestion, you might want to make that clear at the beginning of your presentation, because it sounds like you're covering like all of the spaces, and that sounds big, and thank you for clarifying that, because the whole goal of like discouraging people from staying very long, my next question was going to be, how does the business community feel about this? Because if I'm a business person in downtown Burbank, I want people to, go to lunch and have a coffee and go into the store and go to the movie. So I don't want turnover if I'm a business in downtown Burbank, but if I'm one of those businesses where I'm stopping in to pick up my repaired shoes, that's different. So a little more clarity on scope would be helpful. Okay, so that helps, that narrows a lot of my questions if it's small. As a user of paid parking in other cities, gosh, it's hard. It's really, especially if you're someone who needs glasses to see something, and if you're in the sun, or it's dark, or there's graffiti, or any kind of scratch out on the screen, and you're there with your credit card, you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to pay the fee, figure out your parking space, figure out the kiosk, get your credit card in, be sure you have the right amount of time. Like, it's a stressful transaction. So if there are options with your vendor about the kiosk or the signage or any way to make that easier for people and not stressful, I just encourage that as you think through the actual user experience in this.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Sure. Okay, I think given the pretty small scope of it, that's all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. Anyone have questions now? There we go.
I have a question. I was just doing a quick math. For 150 spots, $1 an hour, have you talked to some vendors if this is something that's even profitable for them to take the roles of handling the enforcement and management of the parking?
Yes, it is for them. Yes, they're very interested.
Okay. And one comment I have, just because the Glendale brought up in the conversation, Glendale has few city-owned parking structures that they are well managed in terms of the counts of available spots, and they have signs throughout the downtown Glendale that points, like a wayfinding sign that tells people the availability of parking spots on those parking structures. Have you looked into something similar to point people to our available parking structures around downtown area with availability of the signage? I remember the one parking on the Palm used to have those signage, both parkings, but I think none of them are working lately. Have you looked at something on a bigger scale for all the parking structures available through the downtown to have some sort of wayfinding and availability of the spots on those lots?
Thank you for that question and comment. You're right. We used to have those types of signage, and when we roll out the parking management plan today for on-street, it'll have the basic signage, and it won't be electronic for this project. But you're right. There's definitely technology solutions today for parking structures and lots where it can tell you the availability through sensors, and that would be something that we would look into when we need to manage parking structures a little bit better. But for on-street, we don't see that as a common practice to have that type of sensor for on-street, but you're right, that type of technology is available for structures and lots.
And to further add on to that, I think that type of investment would be something that we would want if we're able to see if the revenue that a project like this project is able to create is enough to pay for something like that.
That's good. Just my personal experience is anytime we go any of the parking structures on Palm on a weekend, you have to drive all the way to the roof, make a U-turn, come back, and there are times that you don't find a parking spot, you have to go somewhere else. The worst case is you park at the mall and walk down. So those parkings get pretty busy during the weekends.
Yeah, they do. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
So speaking of parking structures, based on that and all the apartments that are going into the city and looking to the future, has there been any consideration to that parking lot behind the city hall there, maybe putting in a parking structure there, and then giving us the ability to upgrade then the other parking structure right there on Palm? That is a very narrow, I drive a big truck, so it's very narrow to get into. And then you could have 6, 7, 8 times the parking spaces that are there and are always full on the weekend. Any consideration to that?
Not at the moment, but we will be continuing to monitor our parking facilities and portfolio to see what kind of changes that we need to make as we continue down this process. One nice thing about starting with managing on-street parking is that we can see how it might affect off-street parking. As we discussed earlier, we might see some parkers migrating to the structures, and they might become more and more full. If they become more and more full, we might need to manage price at those parking structures. I mean, this is all theoretical, but that's a path that we could go down. And if it turns out that all the structures are full at some future point, that might be an indication that we need to build a new or more parking capacity, whether that be extra lots or extra structures or what have you.
Thank you.
Please go ahead. Oh, anyone? You.
So Maria went there to the future. So in the long run, if we're trying to achieve some of our goals, like having people take public transportation or ride a bicycle or walk into downtown, why don't we price more of our spaces to, if people choose to bring a vehicle and park it, and if they want to park it for 4 hours or 6 hours in a lot and spend the day, why don't we price that so that there is an actual cost to doing that versus other transportation costs?
That is a great question.
That's a very good question. It's a balance between what do our residents want, what do our community want, how do we shift from the change from free parking to paid parking, and we want to be mindful of what this means to the community. And I think if a staff were to have such a drastic change, it would be a harder mechanism to adjust. And so this past year has been a huge effort to make sure that people understand what the purpose is for parking management and what we want to achieve with it, as well as what we can do with the revenue and invest it back into downtown. And I think it's a more of a balance of, it'd be great if we could charge whatever we want, but at the same time, we are here for our community, and we understand that some people do want free parking and they have different reasons why, and then there's some people that don't mind it. And so I think knowing that that part exists, our proposal is to start somewhere where we see that pricing is very similar to our neighbors, and that we don't have people, shift towards how they feel about Burbank just because our pricing is so different.
Sure, thank you. Do you, to build out this chart, if you did one more column, how many parking spaces in our neighboring cities are under the pricing?
That is a great question. We would have to do some research and get back to you on that.
We have some information that wasn't shown. For instance, City of LA, they have different zones for their parking meters, and they go up to $4 an hour.
$6.
Or $6 an hour. And I know we have information from San Francisco where they go up to,
Some parking in San Francisco is maybe $11 25 an hour, but San Francisco is quite a different city
Right,
density-wise than Burbank is. I don't anticipate us ever getting that high.
right. I think we just encourage you to think about going forward, not so much the rate as the scope of coverage. I'll give you an example. We went to dinner near Century City in LA last weekend, and we figured out how to do the parking thing for our parking space. And for 2 hours, it was $1.25 to park on the west side of LA, which seemed like, wow, here we are parking on the west side of LA, and it's $1.25. So I have no grudge whatsoever other than operating the equipment to pay $1.25 on the west side of LA. So, I mean, even if it was, when we're revealing ages, but like, even if it was 10 cents an hour, even if it was 25 cents an hour, to get some value for the parking space and to maybe start to build a practice that if you drive downtown, it will cost you a little money, not a lot, but a little money, and sort of see how that goes. So I think this is a really interesting pilot, small scale for a particular purpose, but I hope you'll continue to explore it in other ways, because we're kind of the odd city out among our neighbors to not do this, and just ask you to develop a little more data on the scope of our neighboring cities' programs. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? I do have one more question, and thank you, you brought this question in my mind. Do we have any kind of data from the downtown business district or the city has compiled in terms of an average amount of visitors to downtown Burbank in a week? How many are Burbank residents versus how many come to downtown from outside of Burbank to do all the activities?
Within our community development department, we have an economic development team, and they help assist with our property-based business improvement district that has businesses as the board to look at these types of data. I think there is data on how many number of visitors on an annual basis, and we could probably average it out on a daily basis. I don't know the number on top of my head. I think, don't quote me on it, but I think it said over 2 million a year. I'll need to go back and check. But they do have an annual report that they release on the vacancy, number of businesses that are vacant, how many units are in constructions within that downtown area, what the average rate is per square foot is for retail. So we can definitely include that information when we present it to council on what that statistics looks like, and they do it every year.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is I don't want to cut off our nose to spite our face. If a tremendous amount of the revenue that is generated through our downtown businesses are from people from outside of Burbank, I don't want to hinder their ability to come to downtown Burbank and find a place to park so they can spend their money in Burbank. So definitely residents are a different consideration, like I talked about, but also people coming here from outside our city, coming down the 5, coming up the 5, and coming specifically to Burbank to spend their money. I want to make sure that they can be accommodated.
And can you help me understand a little bit more what you mean about accommodated for residents versus non-residents?
So in other words, what my fellow board member talked about in terms of trying to discourage people from using cars. So hopefully one day we'll have public transportation here in Burbank that would allow people to just get on a bus and go to downtown Burbank and enjoy or ride their bike just it's a lot easier to just go a mile than to go 5 miles or 10 miles to come from outside of Burbank to go to downtown Burbank. So that's what I mean. There's going to be a certain amount of people coming who are going to need to come via car, no matter what. And they're probably going to be coming from outside of Burbank, so I want to make sure that we can have a spot for them that they, if they want to come here and spend their money, that it's not, we're not creating obstacles.
Thank you.
Are you thinking of it like the price elasticity of visiting Burbank, so to speak? Like, we don't want to set the price so high that we discourage people from not coming to Burbank. essentially.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of interesting points have been brought up, and I mean, I personally kind of like your plan because it sounds like, and maybe I'm wrong, what you're trying to balance is keeping the flow of these 150 spots downtown so that cars aren't just stopped there all day, so when people are coming here, they can get a spot.
Exactly.
And longer-term parking can park for free in so many of the parking garages downtown. So somebody that may not be that familiar with Burbank, they're just popping in, wants to grab a sandwich, can get a spot, and there's less, like you say, going around, looking, and then the fumes. So it's kind of it's not going to be an exact science, but that's why you're going to look and say, okay, well, are people spending the money? Are they not? Are we charging too much? Do we need to adjust it? So it sounds like you've done a lot of research in that, and it'll be interesting to see what the findings are going forward.
Anyone else? No? Thank you so much. This was a terrific discussion, and we really appreciate the information you presented.
Yep. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. This is Lifan. I'm standing for Ken today. So I want to just add a couple points to emphasize what Colin has said. The goal of this program is really just the turnover of this, 150 spots. There are free parkings available in the parking structure that's currently being underutilized. So we want to encourage people who's going to stay in downtown Burbank longer to go to those structures. And from what we understand, the business are welcoming that idea. They want they have parking spots that that's available, and it's because it's just on street parking. People would try to be the more convenient, and they could park there all day today and just for the convenience. So the idea is you pay for that convenience. If you don't want to pay a little bit inconvenient, just go to the parking structure. And then the other point is there are more of street parking that's available than people realize. I've been here a long time. I'm surprised to know that there are 3,000 off-street parking spots, public parking spots here in downtown Burbank. So there are a lot of parking spots. The staff is going to, in the coming months, to really make it more, let people to know certain spot that you may not realize are public parking are actually free public parking. So that's one of the tasks the staff will do in the coming month. So.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a report to the board on an update on facilities, small capital improvement, and maintenance program.
Can we? Oh, there
Good evening, Chair and Board. I am Damian Skinner, Assistant Public Works Director over Fleet and Buildings. I am joined this evening by Dean Pearson, our Construction Superintendent. Oh, happy to the PowerPoint. And in this presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of our small capital improvement project program. And I'm going to do a walkthrough of our budget, as well as the projects we accomplished in fiscal year 23-24. No, maybe it's the wrong way. There we go. So what is a small capital improvement? It's any addition or change that increases a property's value, increases its useful life, or adapts it to new uses. The kind of work we do is basically planned and unplanned small capital projects, and to satisfy an urgent or an immediate need for a project or to replace or add a system that cannot wait for the traditional CIP process. So you'll see as we go through this presentation that a lot of the projects that we did had to satisfy something that if we did not complete that project, it would affect the operation or overall system of the building. So the budget we had for fiscal year 23-24 was 1.625 million. As you can see, we did a bunch of work. So we spent pretty much all of it. So the project costs are spread across 10 categories, starting with building envelope, interior finishes, plumbing, electrical, mechanical HVAC, elevators, low voltage systems, safety systems, facility plans of structural repair, and our fleet systems. So here's a distribution of the project costs. You see we have some spikes here, starting with interior finishes. And then we spent a good amount upgrading our electrical, followed by our low voltage. Actually, low voltage is the lion's share of what we spent. And then a good amount in facility plans and structural repair. The process. This slide is important because it should give you some context on how we operate doing these kind of projects. Although they're smaller in dollar amount, they still follow the same process as a typical CIP, meaning that we have to investigate the issue. We have to do some kind of design or create specifications before we do the repair or replacement. So getting into the projects that we completed, the first thing we did was, this is actually in no particular order, but for the building envelope category, we spent about $10,000. And we did an assessment of 35 of our roofs. That's a condition assessment, and look for leaks, et cetera. In interior finishes, about 148,000, and we redid the flooring in the city manager's office. I know it sounds like a lot, but when you consider the age of the building, we had to do a hazardous material testing. We found hazardous material, so we had to do abatement. And we had to remove and restore the low voltage connections in the furniture. So in the city manager's office, in the furniture, there are access control systems as well as duress systems, things like that. In plumbing, we spent just over $25,000. We added a new sprinkler in the City Hall Council area, and then we also assessed all our fire sprinklers citywide in all our city facilities. Electrical. I should set the table for this. We spent a good amount, $500,000, doing electrical repair. And the reason for that is that our buildings are around 60 years old, and we have aging infrastructure, and things are failing. So the first two projects shown here at Olive Park and Mountain View Park, we replaced failed electrical panels. At Foy Park, we replaced the electrical cable that ran across the ball field. At Maxim Park, we fixed the monument lighting, and I'll unpack that in a second. And at Angelino Parking Structure, we designed and replaced a failed inverter. Now this picture here, and this is a good depiction of why, how I explained that things have to be investigated before the repair can take place. The monument lighting failed at Maxim Park, and we had to figure out what happened. So we had to find this junction box. We had to unearth it. We found that it was unsealed, so there was a lot of corrosion and the wires were all damaged. So we had to replace all that just to get the monument lighting working again. Continue electrical. We did quite a bit of work at McCambridge facility. We replaced 200 feet of electric cable, removed some abandoned equipment and unterminated wiring, and we replaced the electrical panel there as well. At the recycle center, we found that we had an ongoing heat issue, so we had to do a repair there. It's at the city yard, PD, CSB, and City Hall. Actually, the city yard, we had to replace an overheating electric panel, and I'll show you some pictures of that in the next slide. But the following projects, PD, CSB, and City Hall, replaced the UPS or the backup power system. So I mentioned that our buildings are we have aging infrastructure, et cetera. So this is the city yard panel on the left. It was smaller, undersized for the load it was carrying. So we brought in an electrical engineer, gave us specifications. Then the new panel on the right side shows the adequate panel for the load that the yard for that area. We spent only $30,000 doing mechanical HVAC work. We replaced a failed compressor, and this is also at the city yard. The left is the old compressor, the right is the new. Our elevators, we spent about $15,000, and we hired a consultant to do an assessment of all our elevators and lifts. We have 26 of them. 7 are public elevators, and the 6 lifts consist of dumbwaiters, wheelchair lifts, that kind of thing. Low voltage systems. Now, low voltage systems is our network infrastructure. It supports things like Wi-Fi, our workstations, our network phones, our camera surveillance, our point of sale, things of that nature. So all of the projects, and there are many, this is our largest cost category, had to do with that kind of communication. And I should also mention, like in the first example, at the Administrative Services Building, we replaced a portion of failed network cable. And that, on the surface, that seems very simple. But in every instance where you see that, that entry, there was a function that failed or a system that failed. So for example, at ASB, we could have had a door access system that no longer worked. We had to go in there, figure out what happened. And through that investigation, we found that the network cable was either damaged or wasn't enough bandwidth, so we had to replace it. So keep that in mind when you see replace a portion of failed network cable, that there was a function or a system that no longer worked. And that was the solution. So going down the list really quickly, for Buena Vista Library, we replaced an old workstation that housed our lighting controls, to fix the lighting issues there. Citywide, we updated our access control panels to support our WinPack system. And you may have seen those keypads at certain doors or entries, that's to key in. That is our WinPack system. We installed new fiber at the Metrolink West Station. And again, we see we replaced it.
I found this on the web. Why do we update our access
Sorry. And at the recycle center, again, we replaced some failed network cable. So this is an interesting project. This is Verdugo Cabin. And it shows here that we installed fiber optic on the left. That's the pull box and the riser. And this is to bring, obviously, network capabilities to this facility. And then on the right is where it terminates. So this is where IT would access that new fiber optic. Low voltage continues. At Front Street, we installed network cabling. That was a new thing, and I'll show you pictures of that. ASB, cabling for a duress system. We replaced some cameras and added new cameras, as well as a network video recorder. We also installed network cabling for phones at Buena Vista. A central library, more cameras, network video recorder. And City Hall area, we installed a network cabling system for the rest system at the city clerk. And CSB, we added some more network cabling to support future systems here. I know it's a lot. So adding network cabling it varies in complexity in how you do it. So this is 401 Front Street. And we had to run network cabling from the main point of connection. And in order to do that, we had to trench, and then, which we show on the left, and the end product on the right. So you can see that it's not just as simple as just laying a cable. There can be a lot to it. And finally, Foy Park, we did some more installations there. McCambridge, we installed a duress system there. We added cameras, network video recorder at the Metrolink station, more cameras at the library, added cameras and a monitor at the PD Fire, and then we installed network cabling for the pool and chemical room at Verdugo Pool. And that's an interesting thing because it's also in McCambridge and Verdugo. And when you have pool that is regulated, that you have to know how the chemicals are being dispersed as well as how the motors are running. And you want that network communication so that you can remotely access that data. And that's what these projects did. Here we have pictured here, I mentioned that we did a duress system at McCambridge. That's the button there, so it's kind of like a panic button. And that's what the cabling did there. And we also, on the right is Verdugo facility where we added some cameras. So our safety system. So we placed emergency lighting at Buena Vista Library and McCambridge Recreation Center. And they basically failed. And what you see in this picture to the right is what the emergency lighting looks like. And before, they had their own individual backup battery. We don't just replace when we have opportunity, we also modernize. So the way this was modernized is we replaced the emergency lighting in these facilities, but then we wired it to a central battery. So one central battery, which allows us to easier monitor the system as well as replace or maintain if needed. So facility plans and structural repairs, we spent about $200,000 there. And we completed citywide at 12 ADA facility surveys. We completed single line drawings of our facility assets, and they're like site plans, so we know where things are at so that we can quickly access them. And as we move to a facility asset management system, that data will inform that program. The McCambridge pool equipment room, we had to repair a failed roof, and I'll show you pictures of that next. That was quite an interesting repair. And we completed structural reports for a hole in the concrete support beam in the McCambridge Tennis Center, and ADA parking evaluation at Metrolink Station, and a structural investigation at Old Wells Fargo. So these are just reports that will inform a future repair. So here's the failed roof at McCambridge. So at the far left, you can see this is the motor room, the pool motor room, and you can see the light coming in. And then the picture just to the right of it, that's the debris from the roof. And then the next picture, you see the rebar. That's the fix. That's actually the pool deck that was coming down into the motor room. So that was quite the repair. And then the far right picture is the completed project. So for fleet system, we spent just over $39,000, and we did a citywide survey of all of our underground storage tanks. We did condition assessment and an environmental review, and then we also completed an EV charging design for this building, and that's to support the fleet of pool cars that are all electric vehicles. So that's forthcoming. So all in all, we completed 54 projects last fiscal year, and this is the areas in where the projects were completed. And the next slide will show you exactly the facilities that got the most attention. So a pretty even distribution. And we see spikes here at City Hall and citywide projects, as well as the libraries, and then parks. They are the big winners with 16 projects. So I hope I didn't go too quickly, but there was a lot to go over. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Great, thank you very much, all good news. Any questions from anyone?
I have a question. Something you mentioned earlier in the presentation, thank you for the presentation, by the way, the city manager's office flooring, and I know that some of these materials are not dangerous unless they're disturbed, unless you are breathing in the dust. But I'm wondering, are we discussing and assessing the rest of the city infrastructure and considering the removal of all the hazardous materials to ensure the safety of our city employees?
Well, I think, thank you for the question, and I think you're absolutely right that these materials are not dangerous unless disturbed. So as we do projects, we're very cognizant of that potential danger. So we always have our environmental consultant on tap ready to go, and we do this kind of assessment. So the best way I can answer this is to say yes, We are going to do this as we go through the city and we do these projects. I think in the last meeting, Ken mentioned that we did a facility condition assessment, which informed a 20-year CIP for all of our facilities. And that, that will soon be daylighted as we take that to DOC and potentially the city council. As we go through that facility condition assessment and we complete those projects, we'll definitely be looking at safety through that lens, as well as sustainability, electrification, and then those kind of opportunities.
Yeah, it's great to look to the future and,
Yes.
and see what we might need. The other thing too is, I'm wondering if there's any federal monies available for city upgrades when it comes to hazardous materials.
Yeah, we're always on the lookout for federal funds. I'm not aware of any right now. Dean, any chance have you seen anything like that? You've seen, yes, yeah, go ahead, come on. Just introduce yourself.
Dean Pearson, Construction Superintendent for Public Works. And our hazardous material program just is a robust program. We have assessed all of our sites over 20 years ago, and we have a maintenance plan where we assess them every year per all the requirements. And federal. And as far as the grants, yes, we exercise all opportunities. We're always looking. We regularly review our project list with a grant consultant for grant opportunities. And so, yes, hazardous material has some grants available as needed, but we've mostly abated most hazardous material within the city, especially asbestos, just to add.
Thank you.
Good to get it from the source.
Just a quick question. From that $1.6 million, how much of it was spent with city staff, your own resources, and how much of that was done by consultants, contractors?
All contract work.
All contract work.
Yeah.
Do you have any staff work also performing any of traditional maintenance, regular?
Yes, absolutely. And if you may recall from the last presentation, we have about $3.5, almost $4 million is it measure? If I'm getting the measure that funds it. But anyway, we have almost $4 million that the maintenance team taps into to do these kind of projects. They do maintenance projects. These are capital projects. So the difference is nuanced. But, for example, I think some of the slides I showed at the last time, we showed like cubicles being installed or some electrical wires being installed at the Starlight Bowl to support new lighting, things like that. What you see here are more complicated projects that require design and before execution. So they go hand in hand, but there is kind of a line.
Thank you for this presentation, especially the visuals are really impactful. Thank you.
No worries.
So thank you for sharing the budget and actuals for fiscal 23-24. Do you know what the budget is for the current fiscal year for 24-25?
I believe it's the same.
It's the same, so it's 1,625.
Yeah.
Okay. If you know, like, what's the trend on this budget over the last few years?
It has remained constant over the last few years. And I think, the more that we daylight the work that we do, like with these kind of presentations and things like that, I think, we'll continue to justify additional monies if needed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries.
Any other questions, anyone? No? I just have one kind of question, comment. A few months ago, there was a lot of communication to the public from the staff of our libraries, very concerned about their personal safety. So I'm very pleased to see that there's been cameras installed and other security measures taken to alleviate that fear. And I'm just wondering if you happen to know, are there any other security measures that are part of our program that will be implemented soon that are needed to make sure that the library staff continue to feel secure?
I am not aware of any other security programs. I do know that the library staff works closely with Public Works as well as PD to make us aware of their concerns. And if there are things, if they need support with, say, the surveillance system or whatever, we're on hand to assist. But as far as additional projects, I'm not aware from our purview. They may be with PD, but not from our purview.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I meant to ask this first. What fund is this from? Is this General Measure P, something else?
Thank you, Measure P.
Measure P, thank you.
That's the measure I was searching for, and it was escaping me.
Wonderful. If no other questions, thank you so much for your presentation. We appreciate the information.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. And with that, we move to introduction of additional agenda items. Any requests from the board? Nope. Terrific. Pending agenda items, hopefully in October, we will have presentations on greenhouse gas reduction plan and 5-year infrastructure fund budget forecast. Always exciting. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you to the public for watching, and we will see you next month. Thank you.